the Japanese prime minister has, she made some sort of attempt to mollify the Chinese. I think she repeated like sort of one of the old formulas from back in the 1970s about, recognizing one China and whatever, just like the Americans do. Technically, we still agree with that there is one China. And then every once in a while, we'll say, oh, yeah, we haven't changed anything. And I think she did the same, but it did not appease the Chinese at all because they can see that it's sort of like they are really changing. There's a de facto rejection of that old understanding. And her comment about defending Taiwan, in other words, in militarily intervening if a conflict should break out over Taiwan, clearly is a rejection of that understanding that was reached in the 1970s of a single China. So it hasn't worked. There's still a lot of tension. There was actually a little incident over what in Japanese is called the Senkaku Islands, and Chinese is Diaoyudou or Diaoyutai. And
fishing islands.
Yeah, that's right. That's actually what they mean. Right. They're very small. It's not inhabited. The Japanese have, laid claim to them, say that they're part of their territory. The Chinese say, that's wrong, according to all kinds of documents going back centuries. This has always been a part of China. So just the other day, there was another little kind of conflict erupted there. I think there was, this is what the Japanese say anyway, is that the Chinese Coast Guard tried to chase off a Japanese fishing boat, saying, and then the Japanese Coast Guard came and chased off the Chinese. Now the Chinese have a different version and say that they weren't chased off, so who knows what actually happened. So it shows, there are all these places for, potential flashpoint. But I actually remember that way back in the 1980s when I was in Taiwan, there was an incident back then. It's the same thing, the Diaoyudou. That's when I first learned about it. So this is something that recurs periodically. But the change is that back then, the Kuomintang, the Chiang Kai-shek's party was firmly in control in Taiwan. So they represented Chinese interests, and they tried to chase off the Japanese. But now it's like the new government is firmly in bed with the Japanese, and they support the Japanese and their claims. And of course, this angers the Chinese, including, a lot of Chinese within Taiwan who say, hey, wait a second, they're not even standing up for China, for Chinese interests, and we are Chinese. So anyway, that one incident kind of showed how things have, again, changed in Taiwan and where the fault lines are.
Do you see signs of actual escalation? I mean, once again, it just feels like I see the rhetoric and some of the desire for escalation and this pivot to Asia, but then we just talk about the fundamental weakness. I mean, just the idea. I mean, we started a war on Russia's doorstep. How did that work? You want to start a war off of China's coast? How do you think that's going to work?
Yeah.
It just seems like that. It just seems too insane that it's just like, surely we're not doing that, but it seems like we're just on this track where we just keep on pushing
right.
See what will happen until it blows up, and then we're like, whoops, now we scramble and we can't handle it.
Well, remember there was like that RAND study called Unbalancing Russia or Extending Russia that came out. It's just ways we can weaken Russia. We can keep on poking the Russian bear. We'll poke them this way, but we won't poke them that much so they actually invade. Well, how did that work out? And I think that's probably the same thinking. It's just, we'll keep on poking the Chinese. We'll keep the pressure on them.
I think
but we just, the assumption is, they wouldn't ever do it. I've heard a lot of people say that, including well-informed people. But I think that's a mistake. I think that, again, this is something that really, really matters to the Chinese. And if either the Taiwanese or the Americans or the Japanese go too far, I think the Chinese could respond in the way that the Russians responded in Ukraine.
Right. We start off this podcast, you mentioned that there is some growing realism within the West and some attempts to recognize the reality that, hey, we do live in a different world and that we can't dictate terms like we used to. And I think the reason the U.S. is coming to that conclusion is because we have been trying to use what we thought was overwhelming leverage again and again in situations around the world, and they've all backfired, and none more spectacular than with China and the tariff wars. But now I'm just wondering, like, I feel like we've exhausted all of our leverage. What leverage does the United States have left? I feel like the biggest piece of leverage that I think we had that we have exhausted was the dollars, the reserve currency status. If you want to do business, global business, you have to use the dollar. But now, thanks to a lot of our actions and the long work by BRICS, we have countries like Russia, China, Brazil, India, Saudi Arabia, settling accounts in currencies not denominated in USD. They are doing direct cross-border transactions, huge amounts of volume, and they're just circumventing the US system. I think that was the largest piece of leverage. And then, military leverage, it seems like that's the only thing we have left. But, finding out we don't have that is scary. But we have kind of found out we don't have the military leverage, right? Through Ukraine, through the Houthis, through Israel, Iran.
Right.
What leverage do we have?
Yeah, well, we hope so. I think there are realists within the Pentagon, and I think within different defense departments throughout the West. But there are also the uber hawks, the people who really do want to go to war and just refuse to recognize their own weaknesses. And one example of that, recently there was a RAND paper. I mentioned the RAND Corporation again, very, very close, I think tank, very closely connected with the U.S. military security complex. They very recently put forward a paper called Stabilizing China. So this was like the opposite of the RAND Corporation paper that urged us to actually provoke Russia up to a point. But it was very realistic to say basically, hey, let's admit it, that we can't wage a war against China right off its own coast, and so we need to learn to live with China. It was a very welcome dose of realism, and it caused a certain amount of optimism, among dissident circles. But then that was withdrawn. So it shows that there are realists. Somebody wrote that paper. That's good, but it was withdrawn. So it shows that we still have the China hawks that just don't want to see this and you would think that they would just say, accept the facts and say, well, we had a good run. This 1945 all the way, we're talking about 80 years basically, where we could just have our way. But I don't see why it's so hard, or why it should even be humiliating to say that, hey, the world's changed and it always was going to, and now it's time to pull back. But clearly, there are a lot of people who can't do that. It's become, again, a part of their identity as being, the hegemon. And those people, unfortunately, occupy positions of power in defense departments and, throughout governments in the West. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just frustrating having these discussions and providing commentary when one side lives in an alternate reality, and I keep on asking, like, why, what's going on? And it's just like, well, they just live in La La Land. I'm like, well,
yeah.
How long can they live in La La Land, right? They got to get out of there at some point.
You would think so.
Okay, well, let's hope they do. Okay, well, I think we can end it there, Dad.
Sure.
Unless there's anything else you want to...
No, I think we can. That's a good place to end it.
Okay, well, tomorrow we will do members-only videos, so if anybody made it to the end, if you want to become a subscriber, it's $3 a month. It would mean a lot. And yeah, my dad and I, we have a little more personal discussions that I think you guys could find interesting. So if you want to become a subscriber, click the join button below on the YouTube thing. Okay, all right, thanks a bunch. Have a good rest of your day, Dad, and a great weekend, everybody.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.